Winterer Wedderburn regarded the world as a gardener regards a walled plot in midsummer, orderly, sedate, and entirely incapable of surprise. For nearly half a century he had meandered between breakfast and luncheon, between mild country air and the faint damp of his single hothouse, and nothing, absolutely nothing, had contrived to ruffle the calm surface of his existence. Yet beneath the gray felt hat he favored, there lay a mind that nursed a curious contradiction. It longed, with half-suppressed ardor, for some splendid rupture in routine, some wondrous incident that might transfigure the quiet lanes of Surrey into an avenue of high romance. On an April morning, one of those lucid, tender mornings, the south of England occasionally grants, it seemed as though the day itself had been distilled expressly for contemplation. A pale sun floated over the downs, mist lifted from the hedgerows in delicate ribbons, and birds rehearsed their complicated arias from the budding chestnuts. Wedderburn, however, did not stir to admire the pageant. Instead, he sat at a small oak table in the breakfast room of Holly Lodge, methodically buttering toast and musing upon catalogues. His cousin and housekeeper, Miss Mabel Heveringa, practical gentlewoman of 39, robust, years watched him from the far end of the table, with that mixture of indulgence and faint perplexity reserved by the pragmatic for the incurably dreamy. She poured coffee with decisive wrist and cleared her throat with equal decision. "You have that faraway glimmer in your eye again, George," she ventured. "Are we off to London today?" He blinked, as though plucked bodily from a reverie. "Indeed, Mabel, I fancy we must. Peter's sons advertise a fresh consignment out of the Andamans. The late Mr. Batten's boxes, you remember. Boxes that arrived under such melancholy circumstances," she replied. "I recall the particulars only too well. Jungles, fevers, and a dreadful business with leeches." "Precisely the same," Wedderburn said, and the edge of excitement in his otherwise gentle voice caused the porcelain spoon in the sugar-bowl to tremble. "I cannot help but feel—" He paused, seeking a phrase delicate enough. "Cannot help but feel a presentiment." Miss Hevering pressed lips together. "Your presentiments have a habit of returning home in damp newspaper and sprouting mold." He laughed lightly. She rarely failed to elicit such affectionate amusement. "Then let us hope the mold this time proves historic. For Batten was a daring collector, even reckless. Think of it, Mabel. The last unopened case of a naturalist who surrendered his life to the marshes. What if, inside, lies some utterly unknown marvel, a genus outside any florist's comprehension?" His eyes shone. "Immortality may lurk in a bulb no larger than your thumb, waiting only for a modest name, perhaps to flourish in Latin." Miss Hevering's expression implied that Latin immortality would not, in her estimation, keep the winter koal cellar stocked. Yet she merely said, "At the very least, wear your alpaca jacket, and take an umbrella for the return. April skies are untrustworthy. Peace. And 70, and R. And P. P. And an albe. And P. P." Thus the pilgrimage began. Charing Cross teemed with suited clerks, nurses in starched linen, and a scattering of officers on leave. To Wedderburn, every figure seemed a cipher. Each might bear secret knowledge of distant orchids. Each might, by some cosmic accident, become a rival in his quest. The notion lent the familiar platform a mild air of conspiracy. He hurried through the crowds like a shy conspirator himself, pausing only when the blare of a porter's whistle startled him. Then, clutching a tan leather satchel containing notebook, pocket lens, and half-a-crown's for bidding, he hailed a hansom. Peter's sons conducted their auctions in a high what-ceilinged sale-room behind Covent Garden. All exposed rafters and iron pillars lacquered black. Dust motes drifted in angled sunlight, giving the place a cathedral hush, though the incense here was not frankincense but a melange of peat, damp sacking, and floral musk so thick it coated the tongue. Vandas drooped like purple comets from overhead slats, velvety cattleyas glimmered in crates, and rows of stiff, anonymous rhizomes occupied trestle tables at the center. Among the connoisseurs, Wedderburn recognized a handful of familiar profiles. Mr. Albert Meadows, whose fortune in railway shares funded an unrivaled collection of oncidiums. Lady Percival, tall and severe, guarding a lorgnette deadly as any duelist's pistol. And, uncomfortably close, the hawk-nosed Mr. Hanbury, reputed to bid high simply to irritate others. Wedderburn steeled himself. The cases from the Andamans were set apart on a dais and draped with hessian. When the auctioneer, a florid Scotsman named Macwhirter, struck his gavel for commencement, a hush fell so quickly that one heard the scuttle of a beetle across the floorboards. Macwhirter cleared his throat. Lot 35. Contents collected by the late Mr. Llewellyn Batten, deceased. Provenance: Mangrove Basin near Port Blair, coordinates provided. He nodded to a pair of assistants, who whisked away the cloth. A collective leaning forward ensued. Miss Hevering's admonition about mold seemed, at that moment, absurdly timid. Wedderburn's breath caught. Amid several uninspiring lumps of root, his gaze fixed upon one specimen of singular ugliness. Grotesque, in fact, it possessed a crude fascination. It resembled a knot of wizened spider legs, brittle and gray, converging upon a bulbous node dark as clotted blood. A small tin label dangled, Spe. Indet. Species indeterminate. He felt the pulse in his ears. Bidding commenced indifferently. Hanbury raised a gloved finger for 30 shillings, more out of mischief than desire. Meadows countered at 32.2. Yet, when the price staggered at 35, Wedderburn, cheeks warming, lifted his catalogue. Someone behind him muttered. Hanbury sniffed, but declined to escalate. The hammer fell. Sold to the gentleman in the grey felt. A ripple of dismissal passed through the room. They had seen stranger curiosities come to naught. Wedderburn, for his part, experienced a mingled thrill of triumph and dread triumph that fate had singled him out. Dread that fate might only be mocking. Still, he paid promptly and arranged for careful packing, then walked back into the London afternoon light, feeling curiously weightless, as though any step might send him aloft. Miss Hevering awaited his return in the dim cool of the parlor, mending linen. Wedderburn burst in, hat askew, parcel in arms. "Behold," he cried, placing the package upon the Turkish rug. "Forewarned, yet undaunted, I have brought home a monster." She laid down her needle and approached, cautious. When the string was snipped and paper peeled back, she recoiled. "It is hideous, George. It looks so positively carnivorous." "Plant flesh has no appetite," he replied gaily. "Only extraordinary potential." He described, with heightened color, the respectful silence that had greeted the lot, the skepticism, his decisive bid. Miss Hevering listened, alternately biting her lip and smoothing imaginary creases from her skirt. "It shall live in the little hothouse," he concluded. "I shall contrive a bed of teak chips, charcoal, and moss, precisely as Batten's journals recommend. But remember," she said softly, "Batten himself died of fever for that root. Do not bring back more than the plant." He laughed again, though the words lingered. Holly Lodge's hothouse stood in a secluded corner of the garden, sheltered on the north by a privet hedge and heated by stout iron pipes that gurgled like a ship's engine. Wedderburn spent the next morning in a fervor of arrangement. He measured humidity with a wet bulb hygrometer, adjusted the drip-u feed to raise steam, and set a thermograph, whirring. Chirps of distant sparrows filtered through the ventilators, but within all was panting warm silence. Presently he removed the strange orchid from its newspaper swaddling. It seemed, in that steamy half-light, faintly animate. The bulb's surface gleamed where he moistened it, and the jointed roots convex above, hollow beneath clasped his fingers, with more flexibility than desiccated tissue ought to possess. A mild shiver went through him. He pressed it carefully into a wooden basket lined with osmunda fiber, and hung the contrivance by brass hooks at eye level, near the thermometer. "No splashes of water on the crown," he murmured, quoting a handbook. "Plenty of diffused light. And warmth, steady warmth." He stepped back. Among the orderly ranks of Vandas, Dendrobia, and Laelia anceps, the newcomer looked an outcast, a vagrant from plague-ridden shores. Yet it commanded attention. It changed the moral climate of the glass house. It implied stories of sharks in turquoise channels, of febrile nights on bamboo cots, of drums in the mangrove gloom. That afternoon, Mr. Wellsmeaning, of course, myself would very likely have inserted a wry parenthetical note. Here, the hero first stumbles upon his doom. But Wedderburn felt only a sweet exhaustion, like that of a man who has drawn a rare bird to his lens. The days that followed carried him into a gentle delirium of anticipation. He rose before dawn to check the hygrometer. He lingered after dark to adjust the damper. Each morning he swore the bulb had swollen. Each evening he could not be certain. Miss Hevering, meanwhile, maintained an air of tolerant resignation, though she avoided the hothouse. She occupied herself with strawberry preserves and parish relief committees, telling herself that one must allow eccentricity some pasture. On the 7th morning came unmistakable change. From the bulb's apex burst a pointed nub of palest green, like the beak of some subterranean chick. Wedderburn knelt, scarcely daring to breathe. Minute fissures radiated from the emergence, and a sticky dew beaded the surface. He fetched his lens. Beneath magnification, the new growth revealed faint crimson speckles, arranged oddly as if by deliberate artistry. He jotted notes, measuring, sketching, murmuring theories of phylogeny. The aerial roots, too, had awakened. No longer stiff, they uncurled in slow fountains, pale and soft as the flesh of mushrooms, and flattened at their tips into paddle-like discs. He touched one, and it adhered faintly to the pad of his finger, as though the root sought purchase upon his skin. When he drew back, a translucent thread, a mere gossamer, stretched and parted. He stared, fascinated and not a little uneasy. 2 weeks slipped by. Spring matured apace. Lilac in bloom, larks in flight, sheep bleating on distant slopes. Yet for Wedderburn, time contracted to the radius of a dozen paces between house and glass. The orchid threw out leaves at last broad, waxen, mottled with maroon. They spread fanwise, each larger than his palm, and within their shelter a spike unfurled, green and glistening. The fragrance, at first scarcely perceptible, grew daily, an insinuating sweetness that clung to hair and fabric. It was not unpleasant indeed. It possessed a narcotic charm, but it thickened the air, as though every breath acquired mass. Miss Hevering dreamt of vines. She awoke one night with the conviction of something reaching for her across the quilt. In the morning, she hid the sensation behind bustle. Yet when Wedderburn invited her to admire the progress, she begged off with a headache. On the 20th day, a local vicar, Reverend Talbot, called for tea and found Wedderburn absent-minded to the brink of lunacy. Talbot, a man whose hobby was astronomy, launched into an enthusiastic description of Mars in opposition, but Wedderburn replied with murmurs about pigmentation and lamellar structure. The good Reverend later confided to his wife that poor Wedderburn was overstimulated by sap. That very evening the spike swelled disproportionately, heavy with nascent blossoms 3, perhaps 4, couched in spathes like folded handkerchiefs. Wedderburn, unable to contain himself, fetched a fauteuil from the study, set it before the hanging basket, and installed a small reading lamp behind frosted glass so he might keep vigil without scorching the buds. And so, beneath electric glow and vegetal mist, began his night watch. Hours passed. The house long since succumbed to silence. Only the rhythmic cough of the boiler and occasional hiss of drip water kept him company. At 2 o'clock, a faint crack reported. He leaned forward. One sheath split along its seam, and a petal, luminous as alabaster, peeped forth. His heart hammered. Another crack, a second petal, gold-veined and trembling. And then, with a deliberate slowness that felt almost theatrical, the entire bloom revolved on its pedestal and opened. It was magnificent. 5 sepals arched like the ribs of a pavilion, white as bleached bone yet animated by streaks of ochre that converged upon the labellum, a convoluted lip of cobalt and amber, twisting inward as though guarding some secret throat. Wedderburn's eyes watered, partly from rapture, partly from the fragrance, now explosively strong. He pressed a handkerchief to nose, but the scent pierced linen. He rose, wavering slightly, to fetch the thermometer. The bricks underfoot swayed, the lamp halo danced. He grasped a slender iron column for support, chastising his nerves. "Steady, man," he whispered. Yet even as he spoke, darkness nibbled the edges of sight. He felt warm fingers surely hallucination stroke his cheeks. The glass panes overhead bulged like lenses. Then, quite gently, the world tipped. Then, quite gently, the world tipped, and Winterow Wedderburn found himself sliding almost lazily into a gulf of blackness whose silence rang louder than any thunderclap. He retained, for the span of a heartbeat, a vivid impression of white petals blurring into stars. There followed a thud that seemed to jar the teeth in his skull, and thereafter all sensation was folded away like a garment returned to its drawer. How long he lay thus he could not know, but somewhere beyond consciousness the hothouse ticked onward in its steamy equilibrium. The pipes exhaled their muffled sighs, droplets pattered on metal, and the orchid, in solemn procession, brought forth its remaining blooms. Those aerial roots so flexile, so pallidescended inch by deliberate inch, until they swept the air with tentative caresses. One reached Wedderburn's collar. Another quested along the ridges of his brow, indifferent to the clammy perspiration gathering there. Each flattened tip paused, adhered, and pulsed as though tasting. At last a faint scuff outside cut across the greenhouse hush. Miss Hevering had ventured forth, compelled by a prickle of unease she could no longer dismiss. Lantern in hand, shawl tight about her shoulders, she unlatched the door. A wave of perfume struck her so thick, it seemed to materialize, a warm, invisible tide that pressed upon the lungs. She staggered, raising a handkerchief, and the lantern beam wobbled, sketching grotesque silhouettes upon glass. "George?" she called, voice small in the vaporous gloom. No answer. Yet the lantern's arc revealed a glint, the brass buckle of a shoe, awkwardly upward-turned. She gasped, rushed forward, and in one sweeping glance absorbed the tableau Wedderburn supine. Limbs half went entwined by pallid cords, and above him the orchid, not passive but vigilant, its white coronets angling as though to scrutinize her intrusion. Revulsion almost overpowered her, but fear for her cousin stabbed deeper. She knelt, seized a root, and wrenched. It stretched like softened wax, resisting with a subtle elasticity before parting in a snap that loosed a bead of crimson sap-sap, or something perilously akin to blood. She shuddered. Wedderburn moaned. "Hold on, George," she whispered, reaching for another root. Yet the perfume, heedless of her heroics, insinuated itself with every breath. Her pulse raced. Her eyelids felt weighted with sand. Desperate, she lurched to the ventilator lever and heaved. Cold night air spilled in, shredding the narcotic sweetness with a lash of April chill. She gulped it greedily, cleared her swimming sight, and turned back to the struggle. Wedderburn's eyes fluttered, revealing only a sliver of dulled blue. "Mabel?" The syllable died in a cough. "Hush, dear," she murmured. "We must be free of this monstrous weed." She hacked with secateurs now swift, savage strokes. Roots thrashed, blooms quivered, as though affronted. At length the last pale cord lay severed, and Wedderburn bleeding from round. Leech-like welts was drawn clear. She could not carry him, but she dragged with tenacity born of alarm, inching across the brick floor toward the open doorway where wholesome night awaited. Outside, stars glimmered above the orchard. A blackbird, startled, gave a piping cry. She lowered him upon grass, still silvered with dew, and pressed ear to chest. A heartbeat answered, ragged but stubborn. Only then did she allow herself a tremor of relief. Yet even as she summoned the courage to fetch Dr. Haddon, a suspicion, keen as any lancet, pricked her conscience. Were it not for her vigilance, Wedderburn might have perished unwitnessed on more footnote in the annals of eccentric fatalities. Dr. Haddon arrived within 20 minutes, astride a rattling bicycle whose lamp sputtered fiercely. He dismounted, bag in hand, and surveyed the scene. Wedderburn pale upon a blanket, Miss Hevering grim-faced, and behind them, the hothouse door gaping like a broken tooth. "Good heavens," he muttered. "Describe precisely what transpired." Miss Hevering did so with admirable clarity, though her voice shook when recounting the orchid's attentions. Haddon knelt, examined the circular lesions, and nodded slowly. Superficial punctures, bleeding more dramatic than dangerous. He produced antiseptic and lint. "Yet I must say, I have never known a plant to draw blood." "Nor I," she said, glancing toward the greenhouse, where lantern light still glowed like a sullen ember. "The thing is wicked." "Plants are not moral agents, Miss Hevering," the doctor murmured. But the certainty in his tone rang hollow. He dressed the wounds, administered a stimulant, and soon Wedderburn's eyelids flickered. "Doctor! Where?" His voice broke into a cough. "You are safe, my dear fellow," Haddon assured. "Rest easy." "Safe?" Wedderburn echoed, though doubt furrowed his brow. He tried to rise, winced, and lay backshaken not so much by pain as by memory. The clinging roots, the suffocating sweetness, the sense of being examined by alien intelligence. A shiver passed over him that owed nothing to cold. At dawn, a sober council convened in the dining room. Wedderburn, propped with pillows, sipped weak tea. Miss Hevering and Dr. Haddon occupied the opposite side, grim as judges. Outside, robins chirped, oblivious. "It must be destroyed," Miss Hevering said, voice flat. Wedderburn's gaze flicked to the window toward the greenhouse, invisible from this angle yet vividly present in mind. "Destroyed? Consider, Mabel. What marvel of botany it represents." "A marvel that nearly killed you," she retorted. Haddon cleared his throat. "Mr. Wedderburn, self-preservation aside, the specimen is doubtless unique. If its behavior can be studied under controlled conditions—" "And who shall volunteer?" Miss Hevering cut in. "I suppose you fancy yourself invulnerable to poison, Doctor." Haddon colored. "I favor prudence, ma'am, but scientific inquiry demands boldness." Wedderburn's fingers tightened on the cup. Boldness, yes. But last night's memory felt less like adventure than trespass into realms where man had no sanction. Still, what if the world never learned of such a prodigy? The Royal Horticultural Society, Kew Gardens, journals of natural history, all would clamor. His namey immortality hovered like a mirage. "We might isolate it," he proposed weakly. "Seal the house, rig apparatus to deliver chloroform vapors, should any root escape." Miss Hevering rose. "Enough. George, I admire your scholarship, but I will not live under the same roof as that vampire creeper. If you keep it, I shall go to my brothers in Kent." Her ultimatum hung portentous. She rarely invoked her own welfare, and Wedderburn knew the threat genuine. He closed his eyes. Desire warred with affection, and affection prevailed. "Very well. It shall be removed." A collective exhalation. Haddon, relieved yet curious, suggested dispatching the plant to the botanical gardens at Kew. They have secured wards and expertise aplenty. Miss Hevering approved at once. Wedderburn acquiesced, though his heart squeezed as though relinquishing a treasure. That afternoon a specially lined crate arrived from London, accompanied by Mr. Brackley, sub-creator of exotics. Brackley, spare, bespectacled, and exuding academic zeal, listened, wide to Wedderburn's account, while donning thick leather gauntlets. "Extraordinary," he whispered, peering into the hothouse from the threshold. The orchid, left where it had fallen, appeared sullen but intact. The blooms now numbered 4, each luminous even amid decay of bruised petals. The severed roots lay shriveled in damp heaps, yet those still attached twitched faintly, as if disturbed by unseen currents. "Temperature?" Brackley inquired. 85 Fahrenheit, Wedderburn answered listlessly. "Humidity?" 93. Brackley nodded. Favorable indeed. Let us proceed. With commendable composure he advanced, shears poised. The plant did not lunge plants. Never do but the roots drifted towards him like underwater fronds seeking mooring. He snipped, detached, and carefully coiled each tendril into the straw-lined crate. At one juncture, a root adhered to his sleeve. He detached it with a jerk, leaving a patch of cloth darkened by sap. His eyes darted to Wedderburn, but he said nothing. Within 20 minutes the lid was hammered shut and sealed with pitch. Brackley affixed labels. Live specimen handle with caution. Immediate delivery. 2 porters bore it away on a barrow. As they disappeared down the drive, Wedderburn felt a pang akin to bereavement. Ridiculous, yet sharp. Kew Gardens, that venerable repository of Empire's flora, received the crate next morning. It was transferred to a secluded glasshouse reserved for delicate quarantinees, an airy structure, behind locked gates, where only senior staff ventured. There the orchid found new lodgings, a cedaro-slatted bench, gravel floor, and thermoregulatory apparatus superior to Holly Lodge's humble pipes. Dr. Hubert Simmons, head of botanical pathology, presided. Tall, with iron-gray mustaches, he radiated the sort of brisk confidence that brooks no protest from either man or microbe. When Brackley recounted the alleged sanguinary properties, Simmons arched an eyebrow. "My dear Brackley, I grant you oddities abound among the Orchidaceae. But hematophagy. Come now." "Nevertheless, sir, the lesions upon Mr. Wedderburn were coincidental blisters, aggravated by humidity." He approached the crate, cracked the lid, and inhaled cautiously. "Fragrance formidable, I concede. Likely heavy in methyl salicylate or similar ester." He beckoned an assistant. "Record gas chromatograph sample later. For now, pot it in sterile sphagnum. Place a mesh dome, prevent undue root migration until we observe." Thus did the plant exchange one stewardship for another, its saga merely unfolding. Days stretched into a fortnight. At Kew, the orchid adapted with unsettling speed. Roots explored every crevice, thrusting between bench slats to sip condensate. Blooms widened, edges curling like parchment, singed by flame. Visiting fellows remarked on the scent, variously described as gardenia, but stronger, honey overripe, or intoxicating musk. One junior botanist, lingering too long, swooned into a tray of seedlings, earning laughter and reprimand in equal measure. Meanwhile, Wedderburn convalesced. Though he remained frail, nightmares plagued him. Visions of alabaster petals closing about his face, of rootless hands pawing through thinning air. He tried to divert his mind with herbarium cataloging, yet every Latin binomial brought him back to that one specimen still unnamed, still his discovery. Then, on a Sunday morning tremulous with sunbeams, a telegram arrived from Kew. "Strange orchid. Thriving stop. Please attend demonstration of unique nutritive mechanism. Tuesday 11 a.m. Stop. Sincere compliments, Simmons." Miss Hevering frowned at the telegram, suspecting ominous subtext, but Wedderburn's spirits lifted visibly. "They wish me present, Mabel. My instincts were not unfounded. Promise me," she said quietly, "that you will keep your distance." "Of course," he lied with gentle determination. Tuesday found him on the early train, gloved hands trembling around a walking stick. Kew, in April. Dazzle 7, the air seems luminous after London's soot. Blossoms of magnolia, grandiflora, gleamed like china bowls. Azaleas blazed. Waterfowl cruised ornamental ponds. Yet Wedderburn saw little, intent upon the quarantine house where Simmons and Brackley awaited. Inside, he beheld transformation. The orchid now occupied a wrought iron pedestal at room center. Its leaves, once mottled, had deepened to viridian flecked with bronze. The inflorescence bore 7 blossoms, each surpassing the last in size and chromatic complexity. Yet most striking were the roots, no longer mere cables but pillars, thick as a child's wrist, draping to the floor where their flattened ends adhered to clay saucers filled with fluid the color of diluted claret. Simmons greeted Wedderburn with a curt nod. "Observe," he said, gesturing to one saucer. A root tip lay within, slimy film spreading where contact met liquid. The fluid, Wedderburn realized, was blood animal, by the hue. He recoiled. "Ox blood," Simmons clarified. "Procured from the abattoirs. The plant imbibes it readily. Note capillary action along vascular canals." He pointed to faint reddening creeping up the translucent cortex of the root. Fascinating adaptation akin perhaps to carnivory and nepenthes, yet far more direct. Wedderburn's mouth was dry. Does it require such alimentation? So evidence suggests. Traditional carbohydrate solutions produce no growth. Simmons' eyes glinted. Imagine the evolutionary pathway. A symbiosis, perhaps, with blood-feeding insects' roots mimic tentacles, immobilize prey, extract hemoglobin. We stand before a new paradigm. Brackley, pale, interjected. "There is, sir. Also the matter offer motion. The roots exhibit tropic response to vibrations, almost as though they sense warm-blooded proximity." "Speculation," Simmons snapped. "To test," Brackley continued doggedly, "I placed a caged rabbit at 1 yard distance. Within minutes, 2 roots crossed the floor toward the animal." Simmons' brows rose, but he said only, "Interesting." Wedderburn, meanwhile, stared at the plant, entranced and horrified. Here was his presentiment fulfilled, yet perverted. Immortality linked to a blood-drinking monster. He felt, with unambiguous clarity, that they toyed with an agency more deliberate than botany should permit. "Gentlemen," he murmured, "what safeguards?" An alarm bell chimed sharply, the glasshouse door ajar, a draft having shifted the latch. Simmons strode to secure it, but in that brief interval, a gust swept the heavy fragrance towards them in a pungent wave. Wedderburn staggered. Brackley coughed. Simmons stiffened as though struck by vertigo. "Ventilation!" Simmons barked, lunging for a skylight lever. Brackley fumbled at a casement. The orchid-responded roots lifted, swaying, as if the very air carried map of mammalian warmth. A disc whirled toward Wedderburn's shoe. He hopped back, heart galloping. "Compose yourselves," Simmons ordered, voice ragged. "Remember, we are masters here." Yet mastery seemed tenuous. Even as the skylight creaked open, another root probed upward, wrapping twice around a support rod. Wedderburn's mind conjured an image of ivy scaling castle walls, but here the assault was immediate, purposeful, almost strategic. He thought of colonial Marines confronted by unfamiliar tactics, their rifles modern, yet the jungle older and infinitely patient. "I think," he swallowed, "I think we tempt peril." Simmons shot him a glance. "Science thrives on calculated peril, sir." "Calculated," Wedderburn echoed, though calculation appeared to dwindle with each pulse of that scented air. They concluded the demonstration with forced composure. Simmons recorded readings. Brackley replenished blood dishes, hands trembling. Wedderburn, dismissed politely, emerged from the glasshouse into afternoon sunlight that seemed unnaturally harsh. The breeze lacked perfume blessedly, but his nostrils still tingled phantom sweetness. He walked until the roar in his ears subsided, finding himself before the Palm House Lake. Giant carp drifted beneath glassy surface. A child tossed crumbs, laughing. The normalcy struck him like grief. What place had that thing spawn of fevered swamps in Britain's orderly paradise? Yet he, Winterow Wedderburn, had delivered it. That night London's newspapers carried a minor report buried beneath parliamentary debates. Extraordinary orchid at Kew. New species display. Raises scientific interest. No mention of sanguine meals. No hint of danger, merely remarkable morphological traits. Yet word travels swiftly along mycelial networks of curiosity. Within days, Kew received a delegation from the Zoological Society, a chemist from the Imperial College, and even a pair of journalists seeking sensational copy. Simmons, half flattered, half annoyed, scheduled a formal presentation. Brackley, alarmed, doubled security, installing wire mesh along benches. Wedderburn, restless, drafted letters warning of behavior not fully understood, but posted none fear of ridicule, stitched his tongue. Miss Hevering observed him pacing nights, reopening the telegram to reread. At last, she confronted him. "George, you are not well. Each morning you appear more haggard. Has that plant truly gone from your life? Or does it still cling in unseen ways?" He sank into a chair, rubbing temples. "I cannot dismiss it, Mabel. It is as though a corda root, if you will still binds me." She knelt, taking his hand. "Then sever it, dear boy. Write to Q. Insist upon destruction." He looked at her loyal, practical, kind and felt shame. "You would regard me a coward. I would regard you sensible." His smile was wan. One man's sensibility is another's lost opportunity. Opportunity came, though not as he imagined. 2 weeks after his Q visit, a wire summoned him urgently. "Incident at quarantine house stop. Your immediate presence requested." Stop. Simmons. He arrived to find consternation. A night watchman, making rounds, had failed to respond at shift's end. At dawn they found him prone beside the orchid, blood drained, flesh bearing the same circular lesions Wedderburn knew too well. The plant, bloated and lurid, stood at the epicenter, roots slick, blossoms exuding odor, almost palpable. Scotland Yard was notified. A sergeant interviewed staff with skeptical frown. Newspapers sniffed scandal. Q sealed the glasshouse, posting guards. Yet scientific hunger proved stubborn. Simmons now balanced censure against an itch for discovery that tragedy only magnified. A committee convened, debating vivisection of the specimen to comprehend its mechanisms once and for all. Wedderburn listened from a corner, stomach churning. When Simmons proposed inviting a renowned neurologist to examine potential anesthetic compounds in the perfume, Wedderburn could no longer remain mute. "Gentlemen, you court further loss. The creature, yes, creature displays agency. Study if you must, but do so after it is rendered inert. Preserve tissues, not temperament." Murmurs rose. Some nodded agreement. Others balked. Simmons rapped knuckles on the table. Emotion clouds reason. Mr. Wedderburn's experience, while regrettable, is anecdotal. We must perform rigorous experimentation. "Rigor," Wedderburn shot back, within a fortressive. "You insist upon boldness." The debate dissolved into procedural wrangling. In the end, compromise prevailed. The orchid would be anesthetized with sulfur dioxide, then dissected. The operation scheduled for Friday morning. Thursday night. Storms brewed. Barometric pressure plummeted. Wind howled over the Thames, and iron clouds extinguished moonlight. In the quarantine house, the orchid waited beneath mesh and chain, a pallid sentinel. At 11:30, a security guard patrolling the perimeter glimpsed motion. He paused, lantern raised. Raindrops lashed panes. Lightning flickered. Through ripples of water, he saw the plant's blooms bent sideways, shaking. Roots writhed against restraints, coils flexing. The guard swallowed. Perhaps wind buffeted the structure. Perhaps shadows deceived. Yet he quickened pace thereafter and did not pass that window again. At 3, the storm reached crescendo. A pane near the roof, loosened by earlier drafts, succumbed, shattering inward. Through the gap poured chill torrents of rain and gusty vortices of air. The perfumed miasma diluted, dispersed. Roots strained, swelling, eager for moisture. One found the jagged opening, slithered, and emerged into the night like a ghastly pallid serpent. Lightning rent sky. Illumination revealed the thing groping along roof tiles, seeking anchorage. Another flash, and a second root followed. Below, locks and chains held. But the mesh dome vibrated, screws loosening in sodden wood. At 4:15, a brass hinge sheared. The dome tilted. The orchid, liberated, levered itself. Roots grappling like sailors, swarming rigging. Saucers of blood overturned, mingling with rain into ruddy rivulets that trickled across benches and dripped to floor grates. When dawn tinged the east, Quarantine House stood open to gray light. Interior, quiet but for drip and distant thunder. The orchid was gone. Panic erupted when staff discovered the breach. Police summoned. Constables fanned across gardens. Yet search yielded nothing save broken glass, blood-stained gravel, and slime trails leading toward the arboretum, where they vanished. Wedderburn, arriving breathless, beheld the ruin and felt something within him contract Thalf dread, half awe. It was free now, unbound by slat or chain. Where would it root? What beasts or men might nourish its ascent? Miss Hevering's words echoed, "I will not live under the same roof." Roofs mattered little. The plant spurned roofs, civilization, any boundary. Suddenly Wedderburn foresaw headlines, "Grisly fate of gardener botanical horror stalks suburbs." He clutched railing, thinking of children feeding ducks by the lake, lovers strolling beneath plane trees. A single night and London's idol could turn charnel ground. Simmons, pale, attempted brisk orders. Sweep every hothouse, every clump. Notify zoological section quip netchloroform once located. Yet his voice betrayed crack certainty undone by the simplest of forces. Wind, rain, and a pane of glass. Wedderburn turned away, unable to watch bureaucratic fumbling. His mind, agile despite exhaustion, traced possibility. The plant, craving warmth and blood, would gravitate toward animals. Livestock along river meadows, rat warrens beneath greenhouses, or heavens preserve London's sewers, teeming with mammalian life. He borrowed a bicycle, pedaled along gravel paths slick with rain, scanning shrubbery. A foolish quest, perhaps, but inaction gnawed. At the water lily house he paused. Within, warm ponds steamed. Carp and goldfish glimmered. Glass shards near ventilation, Louvre fresh. His pulse leapt. He dismounted, crept to the service door. Found it ajar. Inside, twilight reigned. Giant Victoria Amazonica pads floated, glossy and serene. Lilies exhaled faint sweetness. But beneath it lurked that other fragrance diluted. Yes, yet unmistakable. He advanced along the walkway, ears straining. A ripple disturbed the pool. Broad leaves quivered, though no breeze stirred. Then he saw it. A mass of pale roots draped from the iron lattice overhead. Tips trailing the water where a fish, senseless, bobbed belly up. Another fish twitched, entangled. Roots tightened, drawing prey skyward in minute jerks. Droplets spattered. Wedderburn's breath froze. Above, in gloom near the glass roof, blooms glowed faintly, as though lit from within, their white petals now fringed, rusty, perhaps from oxidized blood. He gripped the bicycle lamp, contemplating retreat. Yet to flee meant further predation, perhaps scaling to human tragedy. Something must be done. Slowly, silently, he backed out. Outside, a gardener pushed a barrow, oblivious. Wedderburn seized his arm. "Fetch Dr. Simmons, and bring chloroform 2 bottle sand ropes." The gardener stared, but Wedderburn's urgency pierced bewilderment. He ran. Moments stretched like drawn sinew. Wind rattled palms, frogs croaked. Wedderburn waited, eyes fixed on the doorway, mind rehearsing plan. One man with lantern distracts roots. Others creep behind, cast net, drench with chloroform. He half expected the orchid to slither out, sensing his proximity. Feet pounded gravel. Simmons, Brackley, 2 porters, bottles clinking, a canvas net. "Where?" Simmons demanded, breathless. "Within. Above pool," Wedderburn hissed. "Roots responsive to movement. Approach with care." They formed tacit phalanx, lanterns hooded. Inside, the scene remained. Pads floating innocently, though now 3 fish dangled half-consumed. Porters exchanged glances, swallowing bile. Simmons motioned. Brackley pivoted left, Porter's right, net suspended between. Wedderburn advanced a step, lifting lamp unshielded. Light flared. Roots writhed, descending like coiling snakes. One brushed his shoulder. Slick coldness sent shiver. But the distraction sufficed. Simmons leapt, flinging chloroform. Porter's hurled net upward. Cloth enveloped blooms, fumes billowed stark. The plant reacted convulsively, roots whipping, net ballooning. Glass rattled as stem jerked against lattice. Yet chloroform vapor, heavier than air, cascaded down, bathing leaves. Movement slowed, sagged. Roots drooped, curling inward as though cringing. At last, stillness. No cheer rose, only ragged breathing, scent of anesthetic mingling with floral musk. Simmons signaled extraction. They severed supporting vines, lowering the limp mass onto tarpaulin spread across floor tiles. Petals browned rapidly, edges crisping. A gasp, almost sighing, escaped some hidden aperture air expelled from collapsing tissues. "Bag it," Simmons ordered hoarsely. "Incinerator immediately." Wedderburn, heart hammering, compelled himself to watch. Porters bound the carcass, heaved it upon a trolley. They pushed into rain, toward furnace where giant stoker awaited. Flames roared, brighter than dawn, hungry for shadows. In went the bundle. Fire flared green, then blue, licking into white. Outside, clouds parted, revealing a blade of sunrise across glass roofs. A thrush sang, unaware. Simmons exhaled, shoulders sagging. "So ends your discovery, Mr. Wedderburn." He nodded, throat tight. "Better so." Weeks elapsed. Papers, sensing the whiff of scandal, embroidered headlines. "Blood-drinking orchid, destroyed." Yet public interest waned amidst budget debates and cricket scores. Kew issued cautious statements, downplaying danger. Few beyond staff and participants knew how narrowly calamity had been averted. Wedderburn returned to Holly Lodge, bearing new scars subtler than the welts that had healed, but deeper. He dismantled the hothouse, sold remaining orchids, and converted the structure to a rose houseroses, he reasoned. Asked only for sun and care, not blood. Miss Hevering approved. She observed that the routine of tea at 4:30 regained its tranquil cadence, though Wedderburn occasionally paused mid-sip, eyes distant, as if listening for a perfume no breeze should carry. Yet peace, like shy lark, settled by degrees. One evening, as May unfurled hawthorn along hedges, Wedderburn strolled the lane. Children raced hoops. Cattle lowed. He inhaled blossomosant, redolent of honey, and tensed. But it was merely hawthorn, innocent herald of spring. He smiled, thin but genuine, and continued on. In time he would resume botanical pursuits, albeit cautiously. Hardy ferns, alpine saxifragus creatures content to drink only water. And though his name never adorned genus or species, he cherished obscurity. Immortality, he decided, might bear costs beyond any man's reckoning. Yet in a drawer, beneath woolens, lay his original field notes, sketches, measurements, impressions of fragrance. On certain stormy nights he considered burning them, but refrained. Knowledge, after all, could be guardian as well as goad. And somewhere, in forgotten mangrove swamps, seedlings, perhaps still sprouted, awaiting some future collector. On that possibility he could impose no chain, only a prayer that curiosity might one day ride tandem with wisdom. Some 3 summers passed before the sequel of those singular events stirred so much as a syllable in Surrey. The years between proved, for Winterow Wedderburn, a slow accretion of normalcy. Pruning roses, attending vestry meetings, applauding village theatricals, those modest consolations that patch life's fabric after spectacular rents. He grew to relish the humdrum, finding in the ordered calendar a defense against nocturnal memories that, though faded, never wholly left him. Yet stories, like seeds, drift far on errant winds. While Wedderburn trimmed faded blooms at Holly Lodge, rumors germinated in soils he could not see. It began, as many calamities do, with the smallest oversight. At Kew, during the haste of incineration, a single segment of root no larger than a matchstick had snapped free, wedged beneath the wheel of the porter's barrow, and, smeared with soot and resin, gone unnoticed into a refuse cart bound for the municipal dump at Mortlake. There it lay amid cinders and potato peelings, inert through 2 months of dry weather. Only when a sodden October embedded the fragment in cool loam did dormant tissues quicken. Hairy fine fibrils sprouted, groping, and by the time frost kissed the Thames, a thread-like shoot pierced the surface, colorless and bent like a blind worm seeking light. No gardener's hand tended it, yet refuse, heaps are wild laboratories. Decay supplies heat, bones, leach phosphates, and feral cats keep rodents plentiful. The little shoot found sustenance enough. Winter snow blanketed the mound, muffling scent. But beneath, slow chemistry worked. By March the plant had formed 2 strap-like leaves, mottled faintly, and an arrow-mane distinct at first began to seep. A rag'n'do-bone man named Josiah Cribb, trundling his barrow past the dump one dawn, caught the whiff. He paused, sniffed, and traced the sweetness to a pale sprout no higher than his boot. Cribb was no botanist, but he knew value sometimes hides in scrap, and a man low on gin can imagine riches where others see weeds. He dug the plant with a rusty trowel, wrapped root and clod in burlap, and later that day presented it to a pawnbroker in Hammersmith. The pawnbroker, unimpressed, "Smells like corned beef gone sweet," offered 6pence. Cribb, affronted, carried the parcel to a public house where, whiskey in belly, he boasted of possessing a witch orchid that fetches gold at Covent Garden. A barmaid laughed, but an elderly patron at the far table, Mr. Elmer Shadwell, once head gardener for a Viscountrisdon eyebrow. When Cribb staggered out to relieve himself, Shadwell examined the bundle and felt a prickle of recognition. Mottled leaves, flattened aerial nubs, perfume thick as treacle. He recalled a column in The Gardener's Chronicle about some blood orchid fiasco at Kew. Next morning he paid Cribb a shilling, with 2 more promised, and hurried home, heart bumping like a faulty pump. Shadwell's home proved a caretaker's cottage adjoining long-abandoned glasshouses of Elmwood Estate, since sold piecemeal to speculators but left half ruinous. There, in a derelict vinery where roof panes gaped, he potted the orphan in broken crockery and spent days poring over outdated horticultural journals. The more he read, the more exhilaration soured into dread, yet dread soon fermented into fascination. He fed the plant first sugared water, then, prodded by curiosity, a saucer of pig's blood procured from the abattoir behind King Street. The roots bathed avidly. Leaves darkened, bloomed with rubescent freckles. Shadwell, a widower whose evenings echoed, began conversing with it, as lonely men will. News of the strange seedling might never have reached. Winter Wedderburn had not Reverend Talbot of Martian enthusiasm accepted a temporary curacy in West London and lodged with Mr. Shadwell's niece. One Sunday after evensong, Talbot visited the cottage, curious about rumors of exotic horticulture. Shadwell, puffed with clandestine pride, escorted him into the vine-house. The sweet-a-thick air stirred Talbot's memory of that Surrey afternoon years prior. Recognition struck like mallet on gong. His letters flew post-haste to Holly Lodge. Wedderburn, reading, felt blood drain from cheeks. Miss Hevering read over his shoulder and exclaimed, "It begins anew." By candle that night they debated. Ignore. Inform Q. Or intervene personally? Q, Wedderburn argued, will smother truth beneath committees. I, Miss Hevering, seeing the old flame rekindling in his eyes, consented on one stern condition. She would accompany him, to tether scholarly zeal with practical rope. Thus, on a murky Wednesday, they arrived at Elmwood Estate. Mist clung to blackberry brambles. The derelict glass ranged like skeletal ribs against gray sky. Shadwell greeted them hat-win new hand nervous, defensive. Wedderburn spoke gently, commending his instinct to preserve rarity, then asked to inspect. The vinery's air, as Talbot had written, was oppressive. Odor rich as overripe figs laced with something metallic. In the center, upon a barrel, stood the pot now overflowing. Leaves spanned a foot each. Between them rose a budded spike about to burst. Aerial discs, pale and damp, splayed over barrel rim. Miss Hevering retreated, memories surging. Must we not summon authorities at once? Soon. Wedderburn murmured, transfixed. He circled, noting sap glistening where root met pot. Shadwell, misreading fascination, pleaded for secrecy. An income, sir, when collectors hear. But Wedderburn shook head solemnly. My friend, lose it and regain your peace. While they talked, the bud cracked with audible lick. Petals unfurled, white-streaked amber, revealing the cobalt-gold labyrinth of the labellum. The perfume intensified. Shadwell swayed. Wedderburn grasped his arm. Fresh air now. Outside, they breathed foggy damp. Shadwell, sobered, confessed he had been feeding it animal blood. Wedderburn nodded, unsurprised, yet each confirmation tugged a stitch in memory. He spoke briskly then, outlining danger, reciting the fate of Q's watchman and the Nero disaster by the lily ponds. Shadwell paled. Two never knew. Few did, Wedderburn admitted, and fewer should. They agreed. Sever root, burn plant, cleanse soil with lime. Shadwell yielded keys. At dusk, Wedderburn and Shadwell donned gauntlets, prepared a cauldron of paraffin, and advanced. Miss Hevering, holding lantern, whispered a psalm. What followed replayed with grim familiarity. Roots whipped, scent cloyed, but Wedderburn wielded experience, like shield. Within minutes, the orchid, netted in burlap, plunged beneath flame-licked liquid. A column of smoke roiled skyward, bearing with it both stench and, perhaps, some dark genius that had clung to sap. When ashes cooled, they scattered them and dismantled the vinery's furnace, so no ember might shelter remnants. Shadwell, humbled, pressed upon them a tin of sherry as thanks. Miss Hevering declined, but accepted his earnest promise to cultivate only geraniums henceforth. On the train south, night landscapes fled past windows, blurred ink against dim carriage lamps. Wedderburn sat opposite his cousin, hands folded. It never ends, he said quietly. Destroy one, another germinates. But each time, she replied, we are wiser, quicker. He managed a smile. Perhaps the world shall outpace the weed. Or perhaps, she countered, we must tell the world, publish all, that many eyes keep watch. They debated. Publicity might conjure reckless imitators. Yet, secrecy bred vulnerability. At journey's end, they decided on measured disclosure. Wedderburn would compose a monograph strictly factual, shorn of sensationalist detailing morphology, hazards, and absolute injunctions against private cultivation. He would submit it to Proceedings of the Linnean Society, whose sober pages seldom tempted thrill-seekers. Months later, the paper appeared. Observations upon an undescribed orchid displaying hematophagic tendencies. Academic circles buzzed. Most readers squinted at Latin diagrams and set the journal aside. A handful of botanists, however, gleaned the gravity and petitioned Parliament for stricter quarantine statutes. Thus, through bureaucratic slog, protective measures spread. Consignments from equatorial zones inspected under fumigation tents. Disposal furnaces installed at docks. One might scoff at red tape, yet vigilance, though plodding, forms stout ramparts. Wedderburn felt at last a measure of closure. Holly Lodge resumed tranquil rhythms. Bees droned, roses climbed, and the hothouse refitted for innocuous ferns rustled softly. On a June evening heavy with honeysuckle, he sat with Miss Hevering upon the terrace, watching swifts loop sky. Teacups cooled. Do you regret, she asked. Renouncing the chase for immortality? He considered. Immortality, he said, proved carnivorous. Let contentment remain herbivorous. She laughed a bright, ordinary sound and refilled his cup. A breeze stirred petals. Dusk settled violet on distant downs. Somewhere in mangroves, oceans away, other seeds no doubt waited. But here, for now, beauty and safety shared the same soil, and that sufficed. The violet dusk deepened, and the swifts vanished into slatey-colored clouds. Somewhere beyond the hedge, a nightjar chirred its mechanical hymn. Miss Hevering rose to see about lamps. Wedderburn lingered, letting darkness erase the garden to suggestion. He traced in memory the winding path events had taken from a dusty London auction room to Kew's roaring furnace and a derelict vinery's soda-stained cauldron. Each scene felt distant, yet connected by an invisible filament of consequence. He might have slept soundly that night had not the post arrived next morning bearing an envelope bordered with the discreet green of the Royal Horticultural Society. Inside lay a cordial invitation, more summons than request to lecture at their July convocation on Perils and Promises of the Modern Orchid Trade. The committee, it stated, considered his recent Linnean paper a matter of urgent public enlightenment. Miss Hevering approved instantly. Better 1,000 years warned than a dozen graves dug. Wedderburn assented, though diffidence tugged. Public oratory had never been his forte. Still, responsibility outweighed modesty. He drafted outlines, historical sketches of orchid fever, Batten's tragic expedition, the physiology of hematrophy, ethical dimensions of specimen hunting. Yet as he prepared, letters from correspondents abroad began accumulating. Curators in Sydney, claiming to have incinerated an unidentified epiphyte after it exuded soporific odors. A Peruvian missionary describing leech roots near a jungle mission. An American seedsman in Florida requesting verification of rumors. A pattern emerged. Isolated flare-ups, swiftly quenched where caution prevailed, yet symptomatic of broader dispersal. How many fragments resided in compost heaps, glasshouse gutters, cargo holds? Each report pricked nerves anew. His lecture notes swelled, infused with global urgency. Meanwhile, at Kew, Dr. Hubert Simmons, though cleared by inquiry, found his prestige tarnished. Younger staff whispered. Donors raised brows at gothic mishaps. Simmons retreated into research, dissecting herbaria for clues to the orchid's lineage. He obtained Wedderburn's monograph, annotated margins with rebuttals, then traveled to Cambridge to consult toxicologists about alkaloids in the plant's perfume. Their findings unsettled him. Volatile compounds akin to scopolamine, capable of inducing passivity, even amnesia, in mammals. The notion that a plant could deploy chemical subterfuge alongside mechanical predation fascinated and appalled him in equal measure. July arrived hot and airless. London's streets shimmered beneath koala-tinged haze. Omnibuses rattled past drooping horses. Policemen mopped brows. At Westminster Hall, tall windows funneled little respite, and palm fans fluttered like a migration of butterflies above the audience's heads. Wedderburn mounted the rostrum, notes trembling in perspiring fingers. He began softly Wellesian irony, caressing each syllable, retracing Victorian collector's bravado, the auction room's intoxicating glamour, and the sudden descent into nightmare. As he painted the Kew incident, murmurs rippled. When he described hemophagy with clinical precision, several ladies paled. Yet he concluded, not with horror, but admonition. In our fervor to possess nature's marvels, let us not import perils we only dimly comprehend. Science must temper curiosity with foresight. Applause followed, respectful if subdued. Among those clapping sat a silver-haired American with shrewd eyes, Professor Ezra P. Willoughby, director of the Fairbanks Conservatory, Boston. That evening at the Society's supper, he cornered Wedderburn. "Sir," he drawled, "your address was as sobering as an Arctic gale. Yet, I wonder we certain these vampiric flora originate solely in the Andaman littoral?" He produced a pocket diary inked with sightings from Sumatra to Sierra Leone. My institution has secured a grant to survey tropical anomalies. Might I persuade you to consult? Wedderburn declined international travelers' constitution, he pleaded. Would not endure but promised guidance by correspondence. Willoughby thanked him and departed, leaving a faint scent of clove tobacco. Miss Hevering, observing from a distance, sensed fresh entanglement. Mark my words, she told her cousin later. That American will stir the pot anew. Across the Atlantic, Willoughby wasted no time. Within weeks, he convened botanists, chemists, and explorers, announcing the Thanatopsis expedition, so named, he explained, for the Greek reflection upon death, though critics muttered the title courted sensationalism. Newspapers seized the story. Deathflower hunt to brave jungle horrors. Illustrations depicted vines throttling hapless men, though none resembled the orchid in detail. Wedderburn corresponded, urging caution. Sealed boxes, fumigation chambers, immediate destruction of suspect material. Willoughby replied with genial assurances. Fear not, dear sir. Old glory shall not be trailed through sanguinary mud. Yet between lines Wedderburn discerned the thrill of discovery outweighing prudence. As autumn waned, the expedition departed San Francisco aboard the steamship, indefatigable destination, Dutch Borneo. Wedderburn followed progress via sparse cables. Arrived Pontianak stop, preparing upriver survey stop, spirits high. He clipped dispatches, filed them, and attempted detachment, but anxiety bit deeper than frost. January 1900 ushered the new century under uneasy omens. Boer War telegrams, financial tremors, influenza in Lancashire. Amid such tumult, a slim package reached Holly Lodge postmark, Singapore. Inside lay a journal's first pages, spattered by mildew, and a note in Willoughby's hand. Should circumstance prevent my return, forward these observations to Royal Horticultural Society. They concern the species we pursue. Circumstance. The euphemism chilled Wedderburn. He pored over cramped pencil. Day 17. River Kapua's tributary. Encountered Dayak hunters who speak of Pohuruga bloodvine. They guided us to Limestone Gorge, where pungent odor issued from cliff fissures. The account ended mid-sentence, soaked illegibly. Covering letter dated 2 months prior suggested slow mail. Wedderburn's imagination supplied gaps. Cliffside colonies, roots dangling like curtains, expedition lanterns glowing. Then perhapsulence broken only by water and distant gibbons. He cabled Singapore consulate. Reply terse. The Natipus party overdue. Stop. Search underway. Stop. Weeks turned to months. No further word. By spring, newspapers proclaimed them lost. Loss rarely quells fascination. If anything, it fertilizes myth. Specimen hunters, prospectors, and showmen now coveted the orchid with redoubled ardor. Some doubted its existence, labeling tales necrobotany. Others proclaimed secret possession. A carnival exhibitor in St. Louis advertised, "The blood-sucking blossom alive, behind iron bars." Authorities seized a painted rubber monstrosity and fined him for fraud. But serious men, motivated by profit or fame, outfitted ventures with ether sprayers, steel mesh, even revolvers, as if preparing to subdue great cats. Simmons, witnessing the frenzy and perhaps seeking redemption, proposed an international protocol. Mandatory incineration of all unidentified Andamanese epiphytes until taxonomic clarity achieved. Governments balked at blanket destruction. Commercial growers protested. Protocol stalled. Simmons turned to Parliament, drafting testimony. But bureaucracy yawned. It was against this swelling backdrop of curiosity and doubt that a quiet scandal unfolded in Paris. The Exposition Universelle 1900. Celebrating technological triumphs at the dawn of the new century, featured a grand horticultural Palacean iron-glass extravaganza rivaling the Crystal Palace itself. Among exhibitors listed late in the program, M. Lucien Desroches Nouveautés Exotiques. Wedderburn, scanning catalogue, paused. Desroches had once bid against him at Peters' Sons. A footnote claimed display of Un rare orchidée hemicarnivore du Borneo. His heart knocked. Could Desroches possess a living specimen? If so, was it safely contained? The prospect of thousands of ferrygoers pressing faces to glass while unseen vapors crept seemed nightmare conjured anew. Miss Hevering found him pacing. He declared intent to cross the channel at once. She inhaled to protest, then sighed. If you must, I shall not hinder, but I insist upon coming. Someone must keep your feet on cobbles while your head drifts above storm clouds. Thus, in late May, they boarded the New Heaven New Deep packet amid throngs bound for the exposition. Spring sunshine glimmered on spray. Gulls wheeled, yet foreboding weighed heavier than luggage. Paris dazzled. Boulevards festooned with tricolors. Eiffel Tower keening skyward. Electric omnibuses humming like giant bees. At the exposition gates, fountains erupted. Searchlights swept twilight. The horticultural palace stood at the heart of a maze of pavilions, its dome glittering with colored panes. Inside, a perfumed fog of lilies, roses, and exotic foliage enveloped visitors, who glided along raised walkways, admiring cascades of orchids in every hue. Wedderburn pressed forward, guided by stall numbers. At last they reached Desroches' enclave, a gazebo draped in black velvet, ringed by waist-high rail. A queue had formed. Each person allowed half-minute peek through brass-rimmed aperture into inner chamber. A placard proclaimed, La Fleur Vampire Fragrance of Paradise. La Fleur Vampire Fragrance of Paradise. Wedderburn noted absence of any safety barrier, but for rail and the theatrical darkness beyond porthole. Patiently they inched forward. Murmurs rose. Sentez-vous? Comme l'ombre? As they neared, perfume thickened, heavier than memory yet unmistakably kin. Miss Hevering paled. Wedderburn braced. At aperture, he beheld a single bloom immense as a dinner plate. Petals luminous ivory traced vermilion. The labellum coiled inward, edges glistening sticky. Around it, roots thick, iridescent coiled upon a mirror a polished table, ends dipping into crystal bowls of dark fluid. A faint quiver ran along one tendril as his breath warmed aperture glass. He recoiled. The attendant closed shutter, ushering him onward. Miss Hevering, face taut, whispered, No mesh, no barrier, save foolish velvet. They found Desroches in rear alcove. Mustachios waxed. Silk waistcoat radiant. Wedderburn addressed him urgently, detailing hazards. Desroches laughed. Mon ami, the beast is tamesh, feeds on ox blood. 2 fois par jour. The public adores sensation. I provide safely. He tapped a silver atomizer. And should vapors rise, a spray of ether suffices. Wedderburn insisted upon scientific demonstration. Desroches demurred. Perhaps another day. When Wedderburn threatened to alert municipal authorities, Desroches' smile thinned. Without proof, monsieur, you risk libel. They withdrew, frustrated. That evening they drafted petition to exposition directors, citing Linnean paper and queue incident, requesting immediate inspection. Bureaucracy again. Forms, stamps, translations. An appointment set 3 days hence. 3-day sample time for calamity. On the second night a heatwave descended. Glass houses retained day's warmth. Odors intensified. At 11:30, a watchman patrolling Horticultural Palace noted visitors lingering near Desroches' booth, after closing 2 gentlemen, perhaps seeking clandestine thrill. He ordered them away, locked exit, and continued circuit. Near midnight, he heard faint thuds, like sacks dropped. Investigating, he discovered a velvet curtain torn down, bowls overturned, dark liquid splattered. Through aperture, nothing visible but black void. He unlocked side door, entered. Lantern beam revealed toppled easels, trampled orchids, and, at center, the display table empty. A smear of viscous sludge led toward ventilation corridor where panes lay shattered. Above, suspended from iron truss, roots drifted searching. The watchman fled, raising alarm. Gendarmes arrived, whistles piercing night. They cordoned palace, but by then, the orchid had vanished into labyrinthine ductwork. News exploded next morning. Terreur florale à l'exposition. Papers printed sketches of monstrous blossoms gliding through air shafts. Officials publicly minimized threat, probable theft by vandals yet privately scrambled. Fire brigades armed with torches, fumigators with sulfur, police with carbines. Wedderburn and Miss Hevering met directorate. His warnings no longer theoretical. He was enlisted as consultant. Search parties scoured attics, cellars, hydraulic corridors beneath fountains. Perfume guided them sweet trails threading marble halls. Twice they cornered nothing more than spilled jasmine. Tension mounted. On third evening, concert crowds thronged Grand Parterre near Seine. Electric lamps bathed sculptures in ghostly glare. Within stone grotto behind fountains, 2 laborers noted peculiar vines sprouting from drainage grate, pallid and moist. One prodded with boot, vines flexed, latching to trouser leg. He cried out. Companion hacked with shovel. Root parted, releasing spray of crimson sap. Perfume surged. Alarms rang. Crowd eddied. Wedderburn arrived to find paramedics binding laborer's calf, punctured but not fatal. He knelt by severed root, pulse hammering. Segment twitched feebly. With iron tongs he placed it in kerosene jar, sealed tight. The main mass, however, had retreated into drainage channels leading architects confirmed toward River Seine. Night crews opened manholes, releasing billows of jasmine-ethinged steam. Down brick tunnels they descended, lanterns bobbing. Rat squeals echoed. Slime streaks on walls indicated passage. At sewer junction beneath Quai des Tuileries, they found the orchid. Blossoms pressed against dripping masonry. Roots carpeting walkway stones. Flattened discs already fused to damp brick. Bowls of animal blood were unnecessary. Paris's labyrinth offered ample prey rats. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, lay drained. Lantern beams awakened the plant. Roots rose like obscene arms. Men retreated, slipping on carcasses. Wedderburn shouted for chloroform, but echo devoured words. Firemen hurled canister. Glass shattered. Fumes billowed. Orchid convulsed enough for them to advance with hooked poles, tearing blooms, sawing stalk. Sap spurted black, sizzling where it met lamplight. At last, amid choking haze, structure collapsed, folds shrinking, odor curdling to acrid rot. They dragged remains to street, fed them to portable incinerator. Flames reflected on Seine's inky stretch, while Notre Dame's bells tolled midnight. Paris exhaled. Next day, exposition reopened. Albeit with Desroches' booth boarded, velvet, singed. Authorities released statement blaming mutant specimen unsuited to exhibition. Vowed stricter vetting. Desroches fled to Belgium pursued by lawsuits. After debriefings, Wedderburn and Miss Hevering prepared to return home. Before departure, Directorate presented him Medal of Civic Gratitude bronze laurel circled by motto, Vigilantia et Virtus. He accepted, with modest bow. On train, Miss Hevering fingered medal. Virtue, certainly. Yet vigilance must never sleep. Wedderburn gazed from window, fields scrolling gold and green. Nor will it, he murmured. In his valise he carried revised lecture notes, now swollen beyond horticulture into treatise on global biosecurity. He resolved to lobby for international accord inspection bureaus, sterilization laws, sanctions against smugglers. Task daunting, yet after Paris he sensed world's ears ajar. Humanity, having glimpsed botanical abyss, might at last concede that beauty, untempered, could bloom into peril, and if not, then the watch must continue a route by route, bloom by bloom wherever ambition outpaced sense. The train rattled onward toward the channel, steel wheels singing lullaby of caution and hope intertwined. The crossing of the channel passed in a haze of spray and coal smoke. Wedderburn dozed in a deck-chair while gulls pirouetted overhead, and dreamt though he did not later admit it of a world whose coastlines were ring-wessenced by furnaces, each forever blazing to receive any sinister bulb cast up by tide or trade. When the boat nudged New Haven Pier, he awoke with resolution cleaved to his marrow. Back at Holly Lodge, roses sprawled untroubled by continental alarms, yet telegrams waited in neat rows, like soldiers on a drill square. One bore the crest of the Colonial Office. Request your presence at Imperial Institute Biosecurity Committee, London. Signed by Sir Archibald Frayne. Another, from Simmons, confessed grudging admiration for the Paris operation and begged collaboration on a unified phytosanitary doctrine. Even Cambridge toxicologists sought samples, mercifully non-existent, for further study. Miss Hevering sorted missives by urgency, remarking that her cousin had become a reluctant spider at the center of quite a diplomatic web. Wedderburn succumbed to the summons. In late September, he entered the marble halls of the Imperial Institute, where Persian rugs muffled footsteps and a fragrance of polished teak replaced any floral peril. Representatives from Canada, India, Australia, and the Cape Colony lounged in leather chairs, exchanging war news and anecdotes about locust plagues. They rose when Sir Archibald, a barrel of a man with walrus mustache, introduced Mr. Winterow Wedderburn, eyewitness to the sanguivorous orchid and savior, if I may say, of Parisian posterity. Polite applause faded. Wedderburn addressed the table. He recounted Andaman roots, Q's misadventure, Elmwood's spark in the ashes, and Desroches' folly. He emphasized three necessities: detection, containment, eradication, or, as Frayne later condensed, spy it, tie it, fry it. Maps were unrolled, shipping lanes traced, quarantine depots proposed at Suez, Singapore, Durban, and Vancouver. Colonial delegates grumbled about cost. Yet the vision of Baroque blooms, choking sewer, rat sand, potentially children's weighed them. They voted to draft the Imperial Quarantine Act, 1901, mandating fumigation of every tropical orchid consignment and licensing of collectors. A board of inspectors would report monthly. Incinerators funded by surcharges on importers. Wedderburn, appointed ex-scientific advisor ex officio, accepted humbly, though Miss Hevering later quipped that ex officio sounds grand until you discover the stipend. December brought word from Borneo. A patrol upriver had discovered remnants of the Thanatopus expedition journals, shattered specimen cases, and disturbingly, a half-eaten gramophone hornbutt, no survivors save one Dyak carrier babbling of white flowers drinking moonlight. The area was burned under supervision of Dutch soldiers, and lime scattered. Professor Willoughby was presumed dead. The news cast a pall. Wedderburn spent nights indexing Willoughby's fragmentary notes and drafting letters of condolence to Boston. That winter, Britain's sudden zeal for biosecurity met skepticism from rivals. German periodicals mocked English Pflanzen Panikisteri, arguing that reports were exaggerated and perhaps a ruse to stifle continental horticulture. French editors, chastened by Paris, wavered. Wedderburn penned an article for La Revue Scientifique, enumerating chemical analyses of the orchid's sap. The piece, translated into German by a sympathetic professor, tempered ridicule but did not extinguish it. Spring 1901 unfurled with omens less botanical than political. Queen Victoria dead, Edward VII crowned, and talk of empire reform. Amid ceremonies, the Imperial Quarantine Bill sailed through Parliament, overshadowed by coronation festivities. Wedderburn attended royal garden parties where conversation drifted often with gallows humorto. The vampire orchid, now a staple of satirical cartoons. Ladies teased him that orchid brooches should be verboten. He smiled thinly. Yet beneath high society's levity, inspectors set to work. At Tilbury docks, they opened crates from Java thick with moss and startled a smuggler who attempted to slip unlisted bulbs in a portmanteau. Steam lorries bore confiscated suspicious matter to a furnace whose smokestack soon earned the nickname Wedderburn's Candle. Similar scenes played at Fremantle, Bombay, and Montreal. Reports trickled back. A half-living clump seized in Calcutta, emitting dizziness among dockhands before incineration. another, dried to apparent harmlessness, nevertheless sprouted during monsoon storage in Rangoon, but succumbed to saltwater immersion. The pattern confirmed Wedderburn's thesis. Fragments could survive months dormant, awaiting heat and moisture to erupt. But policy breeds opposition. A cabal of orchid magnates Peters. Sons among them lamented lost profits and lobbied for exemptions under expert supervision. They hired barristers, circulated pamphlets insinuating that blood tales were elaborate hoax. One infamous tract, The Floral Inquisition, portrayed Wedderburn as robed inquisitor torching innocent blossoms. It sold well among dilettantes who prized rarity above risk. Matters came to head at a public hearing in Westminster. Peter's solicitor, Mr. Greaves, challenged Wedderburn. "Can you furnish incontrovertible proof, sir, that these alleged injuries stemmed from plant action and not, say, venomous insects inhabiting the same environs?" Wedderburn produced photographs of root discs fused to glass slides, micro-incisions aligned with sap ducts, chemical assays detecting heme-binding protein evidence, painstakingly compiled with Simmons. A hush fell. Greaves, flustered, resorted to ad hominem. "Is it not true that you stand to benefit from increased government grants under this regime?" Miss Hevering, seated behind, bristled. Wedderburn answered calmly that his stipend barely covered research reagents. Committee members smirked. Greaves sat. The hearing concluded with reaffirmation of the act. Peters, Sons, under pressure, pivoted to cultivating hardy temperate hybrids. The smuggling trickle slowed. Summer's zenith found Wedderburn unexpectedly tranquil. Ferns thrived, roses flourished. Even his constitution seemed bolstered by the purposeful labor of safeguarding empire. He and Miss Hevering traveled to Bath for mineral springs, returning rosy-cheeked. Then, in early August, a cable from New York jarred serenity. Unidentified orchid found blooming Central Park. Greenhouse stop. 2 horticulturists. Unconscious. 1 serious stop. Request urgent guidance stop. Park Commissioner Bickford. America, outside imperial jurisdiction, now faced the menace. Wedderburn penned recommendations, urging chloroform fumigation and prompt destruction. Yet transatlantic mail lagged. By the time instructions arrived, newspapers screamed of a man-eating flower in the heart of Manhattan. Sensation seekers stormed the park gates. Authorities, fearing panic, cordoned conservatory and summoned Columbia University chemists. They hesitated, debated, spilt time until fumes overcame a patrolman standing watch. The mayor ordered the National Guard to intervene. Soldiers with bayonets and turpentine set the place ablaze. Flames rose against skyline. Glass rained like sleet. The episode galvanized American legislators. Within a month, Congress passed the Exotic Species Exclusion Act, mirroring Britain's quarantine. Wedderburn's correspondence with Washington burgeoned. He shipped reprints, diagrams, vials of neutralized sap for study. The Atlantic, once barrier, became conduit of cooperation. By Christmas 1901, a patchwork of laws girdled much of the industrialized world. The orchid, now christened Hemivorax venenatus, by a Viennese taxonomist using Wedderburn's herbarium samples, found itself hunted, its every rumored appearance triggering torch and tonic. In remote places, however, enforcement remained tenuous. Brazilian river pilots whispered of Flor of Noite, clinging to kapok branches. Traders on the Congo wrote of sickly sweet breezes drifting from undiscovered groves. Wedderburn, worn yet resolute, recognized that vigilance must decentralize. He proposed an international phytosanitary bureau, a clearinghouse of alerts, protocols, and field reports. To his astonishment, delegates at the St. Louis World's Fair, 1904, adopted the motion, establishing headquarters in Geneva. Telegraph lines would thenceforth carry coded warnings such as HV Veen, Level Red. The world, for once, conspired in caution. Years slipped, each bringing incremental triumphs of containment. Hemivorax sightings dwindled, collectors turned to safer spectacles. Wedderburn gray now, but eyes still bright spent evenings by the Fern House, writing memoirs at Miss Hevering's gentle insistence. He titled them Roots of Caution. In 1910, the Royal Society awarded him the Darwin Medal for contributions to applied botany. At the banquet he spoke briefly. I accept not for scientific novelty, but for the reminder that humility must accompany every ship we launch into the unknown. Yet he could not rest wholly. On misty nights he fancied the wind carried faint jasmine threads phantoms, perhaps, or distant blooms still hidden where no furnace glowed. He would set down pen, step to the door, breathe, and listen. If silence remained unmarred by cloying scent, he returned, reassured that for this night, at least, beauty and danger were still kept at prudent arm's length. And thus, the man who had once yearned for something remarkable found himself guardian against remarkability run amucka, calling both heavier and nobler than the fleeting immortality of a name on a herbarium sheet. The summer of 1911 unfurled beneath skies queerly luminous, as though the sun had been polished brighter than usual for the new decade. At Holly Lodge roses drank deep, and honeybees sounded their perpetual piccolo. Yet in London, tongues wagged of revolution brewing on the very shoulders of science itself. The promise of heavier there flying machines now proven. Radium cocktails whispered to cure every ill. And a certain Austrian doctor muttered that dreams surpassed reason. Amid these crackling intellectual skies, Wintero Wedderburn moved with a deliberateness that bordered on antiquation, though he remained a lodestone for those who feared discovery's darker corollaries. It was in late July, while he attended a modest symposium at the Royal Institution concerning secondary metabolites in tropical flora, that a slender man introduced himself as Dr. Ulrich Reichenbach, botanical attaché to the German embassy. Reichenbach's spectacles gleamed under gaslight, revealing gray eyes, both earnest and calculating. "Your work, Herr Wedderburn," he said in unaccented English, "has inspired a movement toward greater prudence in my country as well. Yet many of our industrialists lament delays at ports. Might we collaborate on a diagnostic reagent something that could detect hemavorax spores or tissue within minutes, sparing harmless shipments the torch? A rapid test." The idea possessed elegance. Wedderburn, mindful of trade grievances, accepted the challenge. Over the ensuing weeks, correspondence sizzled across the channel. Vials shuffled between Surrey and Berlin. Reagents fizzed green, then flopped into brown uselessness. Failures piled like dead leaves. But one evening a formula devised by Reichenbach silver nitrate, married to a trace alkaloid from belladonna, produced an astonishing result. When brushed upon dried hemavorax sap it fluoresced carmine, an unambiguous signal even to untrained dock inspectors. They named it Reichenbach-Wedderburn solution, though Wedderburn protested, "Your component alone does the magic." Reichenbach countered, "Without your impetus, magic stays asleep." The reagent, cheap and stable, sped across empires. Crates once held up for incineration gained clearance within hours. Merchants sighed relief. Quarantine coffers fattened on licensing. The reagent's fame eclipsed even the orchid's lingering legend. But acclaim breeds envy. A consortium of Belgian rubber barons, intent on loosening British influence along the Congo basin, claimed patent infringement upon a decades-old dye process. They filed suit in The Hague, leveling sly accusations. Hemavorax, they insinuated, had been concocted as a scare to monopolize chemical markets. Wedderburn, pained at cynicism, prepared affidavits. Miss Hevering remarked, "It seems virtue must litigate as often as vice." While solicitors traded barbs, news arrived of an expedition led by the Swedish explorer Fritjof Larsen, probing New Guinea's Fly River Valley. Among his crates, customs agents detected faint carmine glow. Inside lurked 3 desiccated bulbs bearing the tell-why-tale flattened petioles. Larsen insisted ignorance. Colored stones for ballast, he claimed, but under interrogation, confessed a Papuan guide had pressed them upon him as charms against malign forest spirits. The bulbs fed a Darwin furnace before sundown. Larsen received a stiff fine. The episode, flashed by wireless, vindicated the reagent in the eyes of many skeptics and quietly strangled the Belgian suit. Time, ever indifferent, marched into August. A freak heatwave rolled across Europe, wilting geraniums and coaxing unfathomable fragrances from city drains. Wedderburn, sensitive to sweet miasmas, suffered restless nights. One such evening, a messenger bicycled up the gravel, clanking bell in frantic cadence. He bore a telegram dashed in hurried cipher. HYV Venlevel Red Incident, Canacale Dardanelles Request, RWS, Guidance IMD, Admiralty Botanical Liaison. The Dardanelles, a choke point where Ottoman warehouses serviced half the Levant. Miss Hevering fetched the atlas while her cousin scanned further notes. A merchant steamer, Tekin Pasha, inbound from Rangoon, had reported violent vegetal eruption within its forward hold. Crewmen overcome by fumes were evacuated. Local authorities solicited foreign expertise before scuttling an entire vessel laden with tea and silk. Wedderburn's instinct urged personal departure. Yet at 66, repeated journeys taxed him, and his counsel now carried global weight without bodily presence. He wired precise protocol: seal hatches, pipe sulfur dioxide, flood compartments, test runoff with RWS until clear, incinerate wreck if containment failed. Hours later, confirmation arrived. Operation succeeded. Infestation neutralized with minimal loss. The old orchid hunter felt a measure of pride-proof, perhaps, that knowledge can travel faster than roots. Autumn descended, scattering copper leaves over Surrey lanes. One Sunday, following evensong, Reverend Talbot paid call and shared a curious rumor. A traveling show on Brighton Pier featured the world-famed vampire flower safe behind triple glass. Wedderburn nearly spilled his tea. Impossible. Specimens cannot survive the net of law. Talbot shrugged. Seaside barkers seldom honored Westminster edicts. Miss Hevering insisted they verify. If charlatan, she said, let us expose before a gullible crowd funds his fibs. Thus a crisp October morning saw them strolling the briny promenade among children clutching sticks of rock. The show's facade displayed lurid posters, tendrilled horrors throttling gentlemen in toppers. Inside, candle smoke mingled with odor of fried whelks. Upon stage, a curtained cabinet awaited reveal. The impresario gaunt, mustached, eyes glittering worked audience with patter about Satan's geranium. At climax, curtain whisked aside. Gasps erupted, but Wedderburn released breath. The bloom, though enticingly shaped, was wax-molded and perfumed with cheap vanilla. The impostor narrated grisly feats, while an accomplice squeaked hidden bellows to flutter roots. Wedderburn stepped forward, voice steady. Sir, you mislead these patrons. That is no hemavarax, but a toy. Mustache bristled. Who questions? Names exchanged. Crowd murmured recognition. Flustered, the showman offered refund to any offended. Miss Hevering accepted on behalf of morality and marched outside triumphantly. Later, strolling pierboards, she observed, your name now protects as well as warns. A reputation can itself be a quarantine. Wedderburn chuckled. Let us hope celebrity proves less carnivorous than certain orchids. The following year, distant thunderheads gathered in Balkan skies. Assassinations, alliances, Arsenal Saul suggested Europe's plant of violence would soon bloom. Wedderburn, reading newspapers at breakfast, murmured that men, not merely flowers, possessed tropisms toward blood. Miss Hevering feared for nephews in the army. Wedderburn drafted fragile hope that human roots of enmity might be pruned before flowering. But events outran prayer. August 1914 detonated, and Britain entered conflagration. Quarantine stations fell beneath new priorities. Troop ships replaced orchid freighters, yet the specter of hemavorax did not wholly fade. Reports surfaced of German colonial troops retreating through West Africa, leaving behind smoldering pyres of suspicious vegetation scorched, lest enemy exploitation occur. Wedderburn, though beyond enlistment, contributed by training medical corps in identifying toxic perfumes and devising field kits using RWS for possible sabotage flora. In muddy trenches, soldiers occasionally panicked at sweet whiffs from unexploded shell sphere that enemy deployed vampire gas. Most alarms proved rotting turnips or cordite tinged with camphor. Still, the legend of the blood orchid stalked imagination amidst wire and shell fire. By 1918, war ended, leaving landscapes cratered and hearts similarly pocked. Wedderburn, now 72, attended armistice bonfires, but departed early smoke, recalled other conflagrations. The International Phytosanitary Bureau, revived after wartime dormancy, resumed correspondence. Dislocation of colonial administrations had loosened controls. Rumors from ravaged Belgian Congo claimed native porters, displaced by forced labor drafts, were cultivating guardian vines around hidden villages. Bureau chiefs urged renewed vigilance. Wedderburn, pen tremoring, drafted circular. Where authority wanes, superstition irrigates peril. Miss Hevering, ever stalwart, proposed they compile a practical handbook accessible to lay gardeners rather than Latin-littered treatises. They produced dangerous exotics and how to discern them, illustrated by local artist Dora Mansfield. The manual, sold at shilling price, emphasized scent identification and safe reporting procedures. No heroics. Village libraries stocked copies. Amateur fern clubs adopted guidelines. It was said that, thanks to a Surrey bachelor and his resolute cousin, British allotments became the best policed patches of soil in the kingdom. Winter Wedderburn's final public appearance occurred at Kew in 1920 during dedication of the Hall of Biosecurity, a modest wing converted from an old palm store. Frail but lucid, he addressed young botanists. Remember, enthusiasm is the radiant heat that germinates knowledge. Caution is the glass that keeps destructive frost at bay. Remove either, and the bloom of discovery withers or runs rampant to consume gardener and garden alike. Applause rustled like autumn leaves. That evening, walking slowly through greenhouses gleaming under electric arculamps, he paused before a display of nepenthes. Carnivorous, yes, but content with insects. He smiled. Nature's teeth could remain small if guided. 6 months later, on an April dawn thick with birdsong, he passed quietly in his sleep, the medal of Paris hanging unobtrusively beside his bed. Miss Hevering, composing obituary, wrote, "He found marvel, faced terror, and sowed wisdom. An orchid taught him all three." In the decades that followed, Hemovorax sightings dwindled, then ceased record. Some attributed extinction to climate shift, others to thorough eradication. Yet among plant hunters swapping tales over campfires, myth persists. A perfume in moonlit mangroves, a discussion-shaped root brushing, hammock canvas. Whether remnant or reincarnation, beauty and danger still germinate in tandem, awaiting those who venture unwarily. But at Holly Lodge, now tended by distant cousins, a brass plaque beside the fern house bears a simpler moral. It is engraved with Wedderburn's own hand, shaky yet certain. Curiosity cultivates wonders. Prudence keeps them from devouring the gardener. And on summer evenings, when breeze carries only honest rose and fresh-mown grass, one could almost believe prudence, at last, has found fertile ground. For years after Winterow Wedderburn's quiet passing, Holly Lodge stood a little emptier, though not silent. Miss Hevering now gray-haired, but brisk kept the fern house humming, the roses trimmed and the plaque brightly polished. Local children called her Aunt Mab, and she would tell them, over lemonade, how a gentleman once fenced the world against a flower with teeth. Yet history like rhizomes beneath lawn crept onward. In the early 1920s, Dr. Ulrich Reichenbach, still at the German embassy but restless amid post-war austerity, accepted a post at the Botanical Institute of Leipzig. There he refined the Reichen-Wedderburn solution into paper strips that blushed crimson when stroked across suspicious sapin improvements so simple dockhands, Everywhere adopted it with pleased astonishment. By 1924, crates at Antwerp or Port Said bore stenciled warnings. RWS tested. Smugglers cursed. Legitimate traders applauded. But progress seldom treads single file. In Paris, a young chemist named Émile Garot discovered the reagent's photoluminescence under ultraviolet arc. He exhibited glowing slides at a Société de Chimie soirée, prompting speculation. Might the orchid's metabolites illuminate pathways in human blood? Pharmaceutical interest bloomed, patents budded. Money, like sun, coaxed shoots both fair and noxious. Miss Hevering, receiving trade journals, fretted. Aunt Mab's law, she said to herself, where profit beckons, peril germinates. Yet her letters to regulators went largely unanswered. Europe, chasing prosperity, had scant appetite for cautionary tales. One autumn dusk in 1926, a telegram arrived from Leipzig for Miss Hevering. Regret to inform ULJAR, WH deceased stop, laboratory mishap stop, request you as a state trustee, receive personal papers relating RWS, HWVN stop, a laboratory mishap. She felt a dull twist of foreboding. She journeyed at 610 across Channel and Reichsbahn to Leipzig, lodging in a modest pension opposite the Thomaskirche. Reichenbach's colleague, Professor Keller, met her in a corridor inevitably smelling of ether and dust. Frau Hevering, Keller said with gentle formality. Herr Doktor perished of pulmonary collapse following exposure to volatile alkaloids. A vaporizer burst. He handed over a battered valise. His final experiments, unstable derivatives of the orchid's sap. We thought it prudent they leave Germany some factions here. He trailed off. She understood. Political winds, seizing upon any compound rumored to sedate or enthrall, might warp science into instrument. She signed receipts, returned to Surrey with the valise under arm like a casket of embers. Opening it in the fern house, she found notebooks in Reichenbach's spidery German, vials double-wrapped in lead foil, and a letter addressed to Miss Mabel Hevering, keeper of conscience. Dear friend, if you read this, my lungs have failed. I pursued a solvent to render RWS reversible so sap could be studied alive in vitro without hazard. But the fumes subdued even my reason as I write. Destroy the vials if you judge. Danger outweighs benefit. The world already balances on too many knife points. She weighed the glass fielce opaque. Silent hand, decided one woman should not arbitrate alone. She wrote to the International Phytosanitary Bureau, which dispatched a courier with a portable incinerator. Together they consigned the valise's contents to flame, pages and all. Ash fluttered like gray butterflies before settling into soil, where only benign ferns drank nutrients. Years rolled. By 1930, the Bureau's annual bulletins listed no authenticated sightings of Hemavorax venenatus. Scholars declared it virtually extinct, a casualty of human vigilance. Popular magazines, chasing fashion, christened it the beastly bloom of yesterday. Children played with tin toys modeled on its distorted image, unaware of truth. Aunt Mab, nearing 80, allowed herself a cautious smile, yet kept strips of RWS taped behind pantry door. Habits of vigilance die stubbornly. Across oceans, however, science tipped into realms Wedderburn never dreamt. In California, laboratories whispered of gene splicing. In Moscow, agronomists irradiated seeds for shock evolutions. When London's Daily Sketch ran an article, plants that drink lighten soon, perhaps blood, Miss Hevering clipped it with trembling scissors. She scrawled margin note. Curiosity again, outracing caution. She attempted journeys to conferences, but age pinned her. Instead, she drafted an essay, Moral Mycology, on the sufficiency of wonder. She argued that nature's marvels need not be forced into spectacle, that some thresholds, once crossed, demand endless guardianship. The piece found modest home in The Gardener's Quarterly, nestled between rose-rust advice and adverts for slug pellets. Few noticed its quiet prophecy. July 1000, 934 brought heat partnered with political thunder. In Germany, black-shirted rallies hailed new order. In Abyssinia, drums of invasion beat. Amid such noise, a thin envelope reached Holly Lodge from a Cambridge undergraduate, Thomas Vale, requesting an interview for thesis on historical biocatastrophism. Miss Hevering obliged students, still stirred her advocacy. Vale arrived gangly, with spectacles fogging in greenhouse humidity. He listened rapt as she recounted Paris sewer odyssey and Brighton pier farce. He confessed dream of isolating the orchid's anesthetic to craft humane surgical gases. She tapped cane. "Young sir, promise me caution." Vale promised, eyes earnest. Afterward, she felt mild exhilaration. Perhaps baton could pass to youth with conscience. She penned a letter of commendation to his supervisor, praising his seriousness tempered by humility. But humility is a delicate trait. In 1937, Vale, now doctoral candidate, wrote again postmark, Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh. He had, via colonial herbarium exchange, obtained a preserved hemivorax seed pod, found unopened in an archival drawer. His letter brimmed with possibilities. Could we not, under sterile conditions, germinate embryo deprived of hemophagic trait? Guided by CRN, controlled radiation neutralization, we might domesticate the species' beauty without bane. He sought her blessing, and implicitly, the echo of Wedderburn's. Her response, penned over sleepless night, was brief. "My dear Mr. Vale, mankind's aptitude for unintended consequence remains boundless. Bury the seed or burn it, but do not presume surgery upon impulses you do not yet fathom." Weeks passed without reply. February 1938. Newspapers carried small item. Lab fire. At Edinburgh, botanic researcher. Hospitalized. Details scarce, but Miss Hevering's heart thudded. She telephoned. Switchboard delays. At last, a nurse disclosed. Vale suffered chemical burns and respiratory distress after reacting volatile plant matter. No public danger, she assured. Miss Hevering traveled despite frailty. Edinburgh's infirmary smelled of disinfectant layered over char. Vale lay swathed, eyes red-rimmed, yet blazing with apologetic fervor. He confessed. He had sterilized the pod, or so he thought. But its tissues, when sliced, exuded vapor that overcame him. In fumbling escape, he upset lamp. Fire-gutted workstation, yet mercifully destroyed sample. "I was arrogant," he whispered. She squeezed his bandaged hand. "Arrogance is weed. Thomas pulls seedlings before they root." He survived. Scarred, but chastened. Later he would advocate global moratorium on resurrection of dangerous extinct flora, citing his own folly as cautionary emblem. September 1939, detonated across Europe. War, vast beyond previous, engulfed factories, universities, greenhouses alike. Quarantine inspectors were drafted. Bureau offices shuttered. Telegraph lines commandeered. Amid blackout, vigilance, slackened for bombs, care little about orchids. Yet hospitals, swelled with wounded, rediscovered sedation challenges. Whispers emerged within dark corridors. Was there not a botanical agent potent and swift? Intelligence dossiers on hemivorax resurfaced, marked top secret. Miss Hevering, widowed by war of nephews, received queries thinly veiled as homage to Wedderburn's legacy. She refused cooperation. No good will sprout from soil watered by sorrow. Still, clandestine projects sprouted. In a subterranean wing of Portendown, scientists exposed lab mice to trace vapors reconstructed from archived sap results. Torpor without pain, but recovery accompanied by hemolysis. Project shelved too unstable, but notes preserved. Seeds of peril banked for later seasons. Miss Hevering did not live to see war's end. In March 1941, during a night raid over Surrey, a stray incendiary bomb ignited Holly Lodge's fern house. She had taken refuge under stairs, arms around family Bible and Wedderburn's first notebooks. Fire wardens found her after dawn, smoke weakened, yet breathing. She lingered 3 weeks in hospital, recounting to nurses tales of roses and vampires, then slipped away as blackbirds heralded spring. Villagers lined lane for funeral. Wreaths bore scarlet rose, entwined with white fern fronds. Her will bequeathed the property to Royal Horticultural Society on condition plaque remain and gardens serve as demonstration of safe exotics. The society accepted gratefully, erecting a new glasshouse with automatic vents and hazard alarms, the Mabel Hevering Memorial Conservatory, where school children learned botany tempered with respect. Years later, 1953, those children, grown into technicians of a nuclear age, watched flickering television depicting coronation of a young queen. In laboratories, they wielded electron microscopes and centrifuges. Yet on a shelf in Geneva's Phytosanitary Bureau, dusty dossiers reminded them that beneath microscopes still lurk scripts older than DNA's unraveled coil scripts that read, "Feed me, I endure." One bright June morning, a cable arrived from a weather station on Bouvet Island, a sub-Antarctic speck visited only by whalers and penguins. Unusual blooms on guano-rich ledge stop. Pure, white, sweet odor detected. Stop. One seal carcass with circular punctures. Stop. Request guidelines. No vessel could reach before austral winter. Ice would entomb evidence. The Bureau debated by radio telephone. Some urged dispatch of naval cutter. Others argued ice would kill any tropical interloper. Thomas Valenow, senior advisor, scar across cheek opined. Never underestimate seed's tenacity. He drafted emergency memo echoing Wedderburn. Spy it, tie it, fry it. Hard to fumigate an island, but petrol and torch might suffice come spring. Whether the blooms perished in polar night, none could know until thaw, and by then men's attention might drift to other crisis Sputniks. Gene splicing, green revolutions. But somewhere, in ice or jungle, perfume surely waited. And so the tale loops like a vine, threads crossing decades. A shy orchid fancier's wish for something remarkable. A cousin's stubborn practicality. A chemist's quest for detection. Nations tussle between profit and prudence. No mortal can declare final victory over appetite, whether rooted in soil or soul. Yet as long as someone, somewhere, remembers plaque and parable, humanity may keep cutters handy, furnaces primed, and curiosity harnessed to caution. At Holly Lodge, summer evenings still ripple with bees. If a passer-by pauses near gate, they may read the bronze tablet catching sunset. Curiosity cultivates wonders. Prudence keeps them from devouring the gardener. And perhaps, just perhaps, they will carry the maxim forward, a seed safer than any other, to plant in the fertile loam of the future. The passing decades, with all their whirring contraptions and humming grids of current, never fully erased the quiet gravity of Holly Lodge. Somehow, as the 20th century marched toward its middle years and the world came to speak of jets, of reactors, of rockets that pierced the stratosphere, the cottage in Surrey still served as a small, persistent reminder that one need not leave the ground to stumble upon the unknown.